If you missed the other two lectures that we have already had, those are already up on our website, or they will be shortly, so you can go back and watch the recordings of those. But tonight I'm delighted to introduce you to Logan Sisley. Logan is a native of New Zealand who just recently became an Irish citizen, right? He studied at the Universities of Otago and Auckland and later moved to Scotland, where he worked at the National Library of Scotland, the National Galleries of Scotland, and Edinburgh College of Art. He joined the staff at the Hugh Lane Gallery in Dublin in 2008 and is now head of collections there. He has organized exhibitions and published widely on modern and contemporary art, including Passion and Politics, Sir John Lavery, The Salon Revisited, Francis Bacon, A Terrible Beauty, Revolutionary States, Home Rule in Modern Ireland, that was in 2012, and Dublin Divided, September 1913, which appeared in 2013. And most recently, More Power to You, Sarah Purser, A Force of Irish Art, which appeared last year. He's especially interested in the relationship between British and Irish art, which makes him an expert in Hugh Lane. Tonight, he will take us on a journey through Dublin's art scene at the turn of the century. In his presentation, one of our few geniuses, Walter Osborne and Hugh Lane's Gallery of Modern Art. Please join me in welcoming Hugh Sisley.
Thanks very much, Cheryl, and thanks to you and to everyone at the Rachlin Murphy Museum for tonight and for the exhibition. It's been a real pleasure to work with you throughout the whole exhibition process. And I guess I'm here because Hugh Lane Gallery's lent 11 works to the show, and the quote, one of our few geniuses, it's a bit of a tongue twister, are words written by Hugh Lane shortly after the death of Walter Osborne in 1903. Lane had only known the artist for a fairly short time, but Osborne had become an important and I think almost kind of emblematic figure for Hugh Lane in the establishment of the Municipal Gallery of Modern Art. Just a note on the names, we've had 5 different names, I think, over the last 100 and whatever years. So originally we were called the Municipal Gallery of Modern Art. We're now called Hugh Lane Gallery. We had a few other options in between. So when I'm talking historically, I think I will refer to it as the Municipal Gallery. When I'm talking in today's terms, I probably will refer to it as the Hugh Lane Gallery. So if I switch between the two, excuse me, and it's the same place, okay? So when the gallery, and this is where we are today in Charlemont House in Parnell Square. I'd say come and visit us if you're visiting Dublin, but we've just closed for a big refurbishment project, unfortunately. So come back in a few years' time. And we moved to this site in 1933. This is before the building was refurbished as a gallery. And the gallery originally opened in 1908 in this building, Clonmel House, which was a rented premises at the time. And on those walls hung 3 works by Walter Osborne. All were donated by the gallery's founder, Hugh Lane, who had acquired the paintings from the artist's estate after his death in 1903. So today I'll go through Osborne's connection to Lane and his founding of the gallery, the growth of the Osborne collection at Hugh Lane Gallery, and then take a look at some of the paintings in the collection, particularly those depicting the environs of St. Patrick's Cathedral. So who was Hugh Lane first? He was born in County Cork in 1875, the son of a Church of Ireland. His father was a Church of Ireland minister, and his mother, Adelaide, was actually the sister of Lady Gregory, the writer, and that connection was very important to him. His parents actually separated, and he spent much of his life in England where he grew up with his mother. And he established himself as a picture dealer in London. And particularly because of his aunt, Lady Gregory, he maintained links to Ireland. She was a writer and later co-founder of the Abbey Theatre, and through her, Lane was introduced to other figures associated with the cultural revival in Ireland. He became actively engaged with contemporary art. He was a dealer in old master paintings, really, but he became interested in contemporary art after he visited an exhibition in Dublin in November 1901. That exhibition was of the work of Nathaniel Hone and John Butler Yeats. The exhibition was organised by Sarah Purser, another painter, who was actually a distant cousin of Walter Osborne. Purser was unhappy with the reception that Hone and Yeats received in Ireland, particularly from the Royal Hibernian Academy, which had rejected some of Yeats' paintings from their annual exhibition. And just to explain, at the time, the National Gallery of Ireland and the Royal Hibernian Academy were the two dominant art institutions in the city, though the NGI didn't really collect living artists. Therefore, the RHA, the Academy, was an important venue for showing and selling works. Though, as noted in the Homecoming catalogue, attendance was down in the latter part of the 19th century. So there wasn't the kind of network of galleries that exist today. So self-organised exhibitions or artist clubs and societies provided vital opportunities for artists. And this is one of those events. The Hone and Yeats exhibition was held at number 6 in Stephen's Green, which was right next door to Osborne's studio at number 7. And Osborne lent works by both Hone and Yeats to the exhibition. So following his visit to the exhibition, Hugh Lane set about doing something for the visual arts in Ireland. I guess it was a time of kind of confidence, resurgent kind of cultural environment, particularly in literature and the theatre, with the foundation of new theatres and also the Gaelic Athletic Association. And Lane wanted to do something in parallel for visual art. And Osborne, along with Purser, Yeats and Hone, would be key figures in this venture. All four of those artists had worked or studied either in England or in continental Europe, and therefore embodied the combination of cosmopolitanism and patriotism that would be expressed through the new gallery. Lane wanted Irish artists to be shown alongside their international peers, and wanted the Irish art student to be able to see great French modern artists without travelling. Purser and Osborne both had a good head for business and were actively involved in Dublin's artistic communities, making them more useful allies to Lane. Purser in particular was a key activist within the Dublin scene. She later set up on Tuaglina, the Tower of Glass stained glass studio. She founded the Friends of the National Collection. She did so much, I could talk all night about her as well. And she also was an organizer of Osborne's 1903 memorial exhibition. This portrait of Purser by Osborne, unfortunately this is just a black and white photo. I don't have a colour image of it. But I thought it was nice to include just kind of as a record of their friendship. However, Osborne's friend Stephen Gwynn was not so fond of this pastel of Purser, which he said does more justice to the grey tea gown which the sitter had brought back from one of her visits to her old haunts in Paris than to the mordant intellectual power which made Miss Sarah Purser a painter born to divine and portray character. The Irish builder and craftsman actually called Purser easily the wittiest woman in Ireland, and she was renowned for her formidable intellect. And I think the sharpness of her mind is perhaps better conveyed in Josephine Webb's sketch on the right. It was through Purser that I think Osborne met Maud Gonne, the drawing of whom features in the exhibition here that we've lent. And shortly after he made this portrait sketch, Osborne visited Paris in 1895 while travelling with Walter Osborne, director of the National Gallery of Ireland. He wrote glowingly to Purser of the city's beautiful colour and tone, which, he said, in part looks almost edible. He wrote to Purser of the pictures he'd seen, And while he was speechless in front of many works in the Louvre, he was underwhelmed by many of the more modern works in the Musée du Luxembourg, with some exceptions such as those by Manet. He asked Purser for Maud Gonne's address in Paris as he hoped to call on her on the return voyage. But aside from their personal friendship, Purser and Osborne were both active in the same artist societies. Both were prolific exhibitors at the Hibernian Academy, of which Osborne was elected a member in 1886. Purser became an honorary academician in 1890, and while Osborne had actually proposed that women become members in 1893, it took until 1919 for the Council to consider accepting women as associate and full members, and Sarah Purser became the first woman academician in 1924. In 1884, though, Osborne briefly joined the Dublin Sketching Club, and Purser, Hone and Yeats were also among its members. The club pioneered outdoor plein-air sketching expeditions in the city and suburbs of Dublin, and established an annual exhibition. Notably, the 1884 exhibition featured 26 works by James Abbott McNeill Whistler, an artist much admired by Osborne. And S.B. Kennedy suggests that Osborne had a role in bringing Whistler's work to Dublin. However, some members of the club were so outraged that a kind of foreign artist should get, or a visiting artist should get so much space, and the internal controversy led many members of the club resigning. Perhaps the conservatism in the sketching club was a factor for Purser and Osborne to become founding members of the Dublin Art Club in 1886, and of its successor, the Dublin Arts Club, which survived until 1898. Osborne served on the committee and as honorary secretary, and this is one of their annual exhibitions, I think in their rooms in Stephen's Green as well. And occasionally artists working in Britain and France, including Whistler, John Lavery, Walter Sickert, and Philip Wilson Steer, were represented in the annual exhibitions. The other significant exhibition I should mention, in which Osborne and also Purser were both instrumental in organising, was a lone exhibition of modern paintings held in Dublin's Leinster Hall in 1899. Both artists were on the committee, along with their fellow artists George Russell and Walter Armstrong from the National Gallery of Ireland. And it was really the first time that a substantial body of work by international modern artists had been shown in Dublin since the Whistlers in 1884. It included works by Manet, Whistler, from different collectors, and the Scottish collector James Stats Forbes lent works by Corot, Daubigny, and Alfred Stevens, and others. And a significant group of works from his collection would later form the founding collection of, or part of the founding collection of the Municipal Gallery. So I think it's kind of interesting what Lane did was incredible in founding the gallery in 1908, but it's important to see him in this kind of context that there was a culture, a small but kind of resilient group of people advocating for modern art in Dublin before he embarked on the gallery project. So after he saw the exhibition of Yeats and Hone in 1901, he set about buying works himself and seeking donations. And he organised a series of exhibitions to give a public manifestation to the project to help encourage public support. In 1902, he organised an exhibition of old masters at the RHA, which were borrowed from collections across Ireland. So this wasn't specifically related to the establishment of a modern art gallery, but I think it was trying to kind of reaffirm Ireland as a place for the visual arts, and was also part of a broader campaign to improve the lot of artists in Ireland, advocating for greater government, grant, and a new building for the RHA. I don't know if you can read it, or I can read it, but he actually complains, at the time the Royal Hibernian Academy was on Abbey Street, which is on the north side of the River Liffey in Dublin, so yeah, the River Liffey kind of flows east to west through the city. There's a north side and a south side. And I think there's a certain degree of snobbery, it could be said, persists today about the south side being better than the north side. So the academy was on the north side at the time, which he describes as a most unsuitable building in the deserted north side of the city. So I don't know how happy he'd be to know that Hugh Lane Gallery now is also on the north side of the city. Lane invited Osborne to be a member of this 1902 exhibition committee, and Osborne advised him as to where he might find paintings and who might be open to lending, part of Osborne's important network of collectors and patrons in the city. His suggestions included Nathaniel Hone, John Jamieson, who was a patron of Osborne, and the writer George Moore. So that's just a picture of George Moore from the Met by Manet. We don't have it, unfortunately. But just interesting that we have a painting by Osborne of George Moore's brother, Colonel Maurice Moore, which was given by Colonel Moore. So Moore recounts George Moore, that is, recounts the occasion when he first met Hugh Lane. He said, he looked around the room in search of pictures worth borrowing, and having decided upon two, he said he hoped I would try to influence Sir Thornley Stoker in his favour. Stoker was a surgeon, an art collector, and the brother of the writer Bram Stoker. Osborne had actually painted him in 1894, although he wasn't among the names that Osborne had recommended to Lane. Stoker, according to Moore, was not convinced by Lane's motives. He saw Lane as, quote, a London picture dealer who had come to Ireland to see what he could pick up. And this suspicion of an outsider interested more in profit rather than philanthropy would dog Lane's campaign for a gallery of modern art, particularly when it came to funding a permanent home for the collection. And I think people like Osborne, Purser, these other artists kind of on the ground in Dublin with their networks were important for Lane's credibility in that regard. However, a spat with Walter Osborne, or between Osborne and Lane over the 1902 exhibition did not help matters. Shortly before the opening of the exhibition, Osborne and another member of the honorary committee, Walter Strickland, who was registrar at the National Gallery, resigned as they felt they had no voice in the selection of pictures. At the centre of this was particularly a portrait attributed to Joshua Reynolds. Strickland and Osborne, and also Walter Armstrong, thought it was a copy and publicly resigned and sent letters to the papers to this effect. And while this challenged Lane's credibility, he took full responsibility for the selection of pictures. So that was in late 1902, and of course, Walter Osborne dies unexpectedly of pneumonia in April 1903. It's hard to know then to what extent the relationship between the two had been repaired by the time of Osborne's death. Certainly his passing was a great blow to Lane, who wrote to Purser, "It has been a great shock to me, as he was one of our few geniuses. I hoped for still greater things from his brush." And Osborne's death was keenly felt in Dublin's artistic community. John Butler Yeats called it the greatest loss we've had for years. And Dermot O'Brien, who was a painter and later president of the Royal Hibernian Academy, and at whose wedding Osborne had been best man, described his passing as a very great calamity. One does not often come across so upright a man with so much humility and unselfishness. And Nathaniel Hone wrote to Purser in June 1903, asking her to visit him, as Walter Osborne's death, he said, is still a nightmare to me. So in a letter to Lane dated, this is Osborne's handwriting, a letter to Lane dated March 2nd, unfortunately the year is not present, Osborne thanks Lane for the efforts he was making on his behalf. So it could either be March 1902, sort of predating their spat, or it could be March 1903, in which would mean that they'd kind of made up and they were all friends again. And in it, Osborne listed prices for commissions. You can see them there on the bottom of the right-hand page of the letter. A full-length portrait cost 300 guineas, quarter-length 200, half-length 150, and a head was 80 guineas. Which possibly suggests to me that Lane was considering employing him for portrait commissions, possibly for the collection of portraits of contemporary Irish men and women that would be a distinct element within his new gallery of modern art. The sitters were eminent figures in Irish political and cultural circles, notably those associated with the Celtic revival in the cultural sense, although others have pointed out that they're kind of predominantly Protestant, predominantly kind of Dublin castle types as well. So in terms of the kind of the ruling elite. They did, to a degree, though, represent various positions on the political spectrum. And that was in part consistent with a conception of the gallery as a place that would unite Dubliners. And this creation of a national collection of contemporary portraiture was an assertion of Irish cultural identity. Now, Lane, in 1903, engaged John Butler Yeats, with whom he'd agreed on the fee of £10 per portrait, which is considerably, it's a fraction of what Osborne would have been charging. Yeats, you may know, is the father of a painter, portrait painter, father of W.B. Yeats, Jack B. Yeats, and Lily and Lolly Yeats, a great artistic family. And he had struggled to establish himself in Dublin on his return to the city in 1900, and was arguably in greater need of support from Lane and Lady Gregory and Sarah Purser than Osborne was. Around this time, George Russell commented that Dublin can't support more than one portrait painter. Now it is Walter Osborne. The rest would starve if they did not teach or eke out their income in other ways, or had independent means like Hone and some others. So perhaps Lane was looking kindly on Yeats, who was in greater need, but it also may be that Osborne's prices were more prohibitive. Even if he had lived, he wouldn't have got the commission. So this is kind of roughly, quickly, what that commission series looked like. Yeats completed portraits on the left there of a number of figures. I've got William Fay, playwright, and Lord Macdonald, who was, I'm going to say Under-Secretary for Ireland, but in the kind of British administration at the time. And it is likely that he would have worked on these commissions actually in Osborne's former studio at St Stephen's Green. Yeats had actually occupied the studio prior to moving to London, prior to Osborne took up the lease. And with the support of Lane, took on the lease again in 1903 after Osborne's death. John Butler Yeats wrote to his son, the poet W.B. Yeats, that Osborne considered him a born portrait painter. Yeats, however, did not have the same temperament, I think, as Osborne or Purser, who were capable of finishing commissions. And Yeats often asked for kind of repeated sittings, maybe sometimes wanted to rework paintings, and frustrated with progress, in 1904, Lane assigned the commission to William Orpen, and you can see they actually both, in 1904, produced portraits of Lord Macdonald. This was kind of like the kind of competition between the two. I think Yeats said that Macdonald wanted to be shown with his kind of badges, with his regalia, although he's quite subtle about it, whereas Orpen shows him, I think, as Macdonald wanted, with his, and this great sense of confidence and kind of bravura, I think, in the brushwork of Orpen. Meanwhile, so Lane is kind of carrying on this commissioning process whilst also cajoling other people into supporting the gallery and buying works himself. These are in the wrong order. There we go. And after Osborne's death in 1903, Lane was eager to acquire works by the artist for the new gallery. He wrote to Purser from London inquiring if anything was being done in Dublin to save Osborne's works for the nation. He said he'd seen the artist's brother, the Reverend Charles Osborne, in this portrait here by Walter, who agreed that Walter would have wanted to present his best work to help form a national collection of modern art. However, George Moore, who we saw earlier, contradicted this sentiment, writing that Osborne used to speak of his terror of Lane's proposed gallery. Knowing Dublin well, he was able to draw pictures of the intrigues, he said, that would soon be set afoot by painters of Irish scenery and by painters of incidents in Irish history to induce the corporation to buy their pictures. So we kind of imagined, apparently, Moore says that Osborne imagined all these sort of two-bit artists lining up to sell whatever Irish scenes. I think it's hard to know if this is actually Osborne's opinion or if it's Moore's opinion. I think it might be the latter. And given that Dublin Corporation actually didn't institute a purchase grant for artworks until 1974, I think that kind of fear was unlikely. Anyway, Lane was doing all he could to induce people to buy Osborne's pictures. He encouraged Purser to write to the papers, looking for subscriptions to purchase Osborne's work. As he said, it would not do to lose this opportunity of a last tribute to his memory. He flattered her by saying that no one had more influence and that she was the only portrait painter left to us, although tellingly, he never actually bought any of her work for the gallery. Some newspapers did embrace Lane's suggestion. The Irish Daily Express wrote, "It would be an irreparable loss to the Dublin public if many of these exquisitely finished works were allowed to drift across the sea through want of a little energy and spirit in securing their attention." This purchase fund didn't materialise as Lane envisaged, and actually I never found any letters that Purser sent to the papers, as Lane had hoped she might. Although she was involved in organising the memorial exhibition for Walter Osborne, which took place as part of the 1903 Royal Hibernian Academy Winter Exhibition. And from it, Lane bought 3 paintings, all of which are in the exhibition here. Mother and Child, The Fish Market, Patrick Street, and Tea in the Garden. So he paid £60 in total for the 3 works, which was arguably a good deal, as the Fish Market alone had been listed for £73.10 at the Walker Art Gallery a few years earlier. And Lane had selected works depicting contrasting sides of Dublin life, the poverty of the inner city in these 2 works, and this is a model that he used a number of times, contrasting with the gentility of afternoon tea in the suburbs. And they also reflect different stages in Osborne's development, from the market scene, carefully crafted using sketches and photographs, which you see in the show here, to the freer brushwork of the garden scene, albeit unfinished. And these purchases would feature in 2 exhibitions in 1904, part of Lane's campaign to establish the gallery. He initially tried to organise an exhibition of Irish art at the St. Louis International Exhibition, and Osborne was to be a key exhibitor. Lane sought works from him, or by him, from private collections, including from the artists Nellie O'Brien and Dermot O'Brien, brother and sister. Their uncle, Lucius O'Brien, was worried about the risk of sending paintings to St. Louis, as were Walter and Emily Armstrong, Walter Armstrong from the National Gallery of Ireland. And given that Osborne had died the previous year, the Armstrongs felt that the artist himself could no longer benefit from his work being seen abroad, that there wasn't any kind of economic benefit to the artist. However, so they chose not to send works from their collection. Walter Armstrong did suggest, though, that Lane contact the executors of Osborne's estate, as they had pictures that he thought would be appreciated in America, including the sketch for Tea in the Garden. And so this is our painting, which is in the exhibition, and then this is another kind of smaller oil sketch for it. So whether he's talking about the sketch for the larger painting, or if he's talking about the final work, which, because it was unfinished, maybe he was referring to that as a sketch. However, Osborne wasn't shown in America in 1904, as Lane has hoped, as the exhibition of Irish art at St. Louis was too expensive. Undeterred, however, he found another venue, the Guildhall Art Gallery in London. So he put all of his work into kind of securing works for an exhibition and found a new venue in London. It included 465 works by 123 artists, so a massive undertaking, including 14 works by Osborne, making him one of the best represented artists in the collection. And the Fish Market and Mary Gillis and her daughter Margaret, both on the show here, were illustrated in the catalogue, in which Lane sets out his vision for a gallery of modern art and a resurgent school of Irish art. Also in 1904, so he organised two exhibitions. The second was back in Dublin at the RHA, and all three of the purchases he'd made of Osborne's works featured in a show of works that were already promised to the new gallery, along with works that people could buy. He was looking for subscribers to purchase works from other collections, notably from Paul Giron-Ruel, a kind of impressionist dealer from Paris, and from the estate of James Starts Forbes. So these were predominantly French paintings, Manet, Monet, Sisley didn't buy, unfortunately, Morisot, and then Corot's and other, particularly Barbizon school paintings from the Starts Forbes collection. He was moderately successful in this, it's fair to say. Not everything was sold or was purchased for the gallery by the great and the good of Dublin, but he did, as you've seen, successfully open the gallery in 1908, and works by Osborne, Hone, Yeats, Purser, and other Irish artists hung alongside British, French, Dutch, and other international artists, such as Constable, Corot, Manet, Whistler, and Rodin. Later that same year, not long after the gallery opened, he organised another showing of Irish art in London at the Franco-British exhibition. And this was part of an Irish village, a fictional Irish village called Ballymaclinton, which was so named because McClinton Soap were the sponsors. It presented a fairly romantic kind of historical vision of Ireland, this thatched cottages and women, young women wearing red capes. And actually I read one review in one of the London papers noting that they were surprised that the Irish smelt better than they had expected. So just kind of evidence perhaps of the prejudice in Britain at the time, although it could have been that could have been a plant, I think, by the soap manufacturers who sponsored it as well. Anyway, the exhibition included two works by Osborne, The Fish Market again, and his portrait of Walter Armstrong. And through the Ballymaclinton exhibition, Lane promoted the development of a distinctive school of Irish art. But he also sought to highlight the fact that so many of the leaders of the various movements connected with British art are themselves Irishmen or of Irish parentage. And he clearly counted Osborne amongst this group. Lane advocated a national Irish art that was also cosmopolitan, and it was his association with, I think, artists like Osborne, Purser, Hone, and Orpen, and Yeats that had influenced his thinking on this. At the time of Osborne's death, Lane had worried that the artist would be neglected by public collections in Ireland. But the National Gallery of Ireland under Walter Armstrong bought numerous works, and both the municipal and national collections would continue to build on these acquisitions. Lane succeeded Walter Armstrong as director of the National Gallery of Ireland in 1914, but he wouldn't live to see these developments. Like Osborne, he died young, perishing when the Lusitania was sunk off the coast of Cork in Southern Ireland in 1915. aged just 39, I think. I mean, two people who died young with kind of, incredible legacies. So we now have a really significant group of works by Osborne in the collection, all of which were donated in the years following Lane's death. So the initial 3 works were gifted, and many of these other gifts were by people associated with Osborne and personally. So in part they map his kind of social network. I'll just I won't go through everything in the collection, but just to show you some of the other works that didn't travel here to Notre Dame. We have this wonderful cornfield scene, which was donated by Dr. Travis Smith, and he was he was vicar at St. Bartholomew's Church, and Dr. Smith, along with Charles Osborne, Walter's brother, married Violet Osborne to William Stockley. And Travis Smith also was painted by Osborne, so a very kind of close family connection there. I'm really fond of this tiny little portrait by Osborne of John Bedell Stanford McIlwain. JBS McIlwain was another artist and met Osborne as a student and remained friends. It's really quite a close, kind of tightly controlled work. It reminds me a little bit of the kind of early work of Lucian Freud, actually, in that kind of much more kind of tight brushwork and tightly controlled nature that he would kind of, I guess, free himself of, you could say, in later years. We've also a pastel of Nellie O'Brien, which was donated by Zoltan Frankel, an important Hungarian-born collector of modern art who moved to Belfast in 1938. And Nellie O'Brien was an artist, as I said, and met Osborne through her brother Dermot O'Brien, later president of the RHA. And after Osborne's death, she claimed to have been engaged to Osborne. And then another scene at Marsh's Library. There's one in the exhibition here, but with 2 in the collection, and I'll return to this shortly. But this one was donated by Aileen Bodkin in memory of her husband, Dr. Thomas Bodkin. And Bodkin was an art historian and later director of the National Gallery of Ireland and then the Barber Institute in Birmingham. Hugely important in this period in terms of all sorts of things, in terms of currency design in the Free State, art education. He was on every sort of committee and had his finger in an awful lot of pies. And he published this book in 1920 for Irish landscape painters, which includes Nathaniel Hone and Walter Osborne. But the most sizable group of paintings in our collection are from the Charles Edward Osborne bequest. So I mentioned earlier that Charles Osborne had relayed Walter's desire to be represented in Lane's gallery, but at the time of Osborne's death felt unable to donate paintings to the artist, by the artist to the gallery project. However, years later, he did bequeath 12 works to the gallery, enriching our collection. Now, Osborne actually died in 1936, but we didn't receive the paintings until 1971, and they were cared for. It sometimes happens with bequests. They sort of go through, they're bequeathed, and then they stay with the family until the death of maybe a descendant. And these works were cared for by Violet Stockley, Walter Osborne, and Charles Osborne's niece until her death in 1971, when they were transferred to the gallery. And in that same year, Violet Stockley's half-sister, Sophia Mallon, donated portraits of the artist's mother on the left there, which is in the exhibition, and this wonderful pastel of the artist's father, William Osborne, also an artist, which unfortunately just the nature of the medium meant it couldn't travel across the Atlantic. And just by chance, I was going through the National Gallery of Ireland board minutes for the research on Sarah Pursa, because she was on the board of governors of the National Gallery of Ireland from 1914 until her death in 1943. Phenomenal at the time. So I was going through their board minutes to kind of understand her contribution to their history, and came across this reference. The director submitted an offer for purchase from Mrs. Stockley of 6 pictures by Walter Osborne. Prices not stated. The offer was declined. And this was in April 1936, just 2 months after the death of Charles Edward Osborne. So I'm assuming that these may well have been works from Charles Edward Osborne's estate that Violet Stockley was then trying to sell, but unsuccessfully on this occasion. Whether or not they're the same paintings that later came to us in 1971, we'll never know. The works aren't listed. But speculation aside, the gifts that, the bequest that Charles Edward Osborne gave are mostly small-scale studies on board, sort of small portable works that he might have worked on outdoors whilst travelling. And we've got these 4 wonderful scenes of kind of village life, particularly 2 with the play of light on water, all of which are in this exhibition, aren't they? They're all, yeah. A couple of works that aren't in the exhibition, 2 small studies of children, and of course Brendan Rooney was here last week, and I assume he talked about Osborne's interest in painting children, which he writes about in the catalogue. And then we've got children in the landscape, and we've also got animals in the landscape. And we've got this pair of works of cows in a field and goats in a field. And this is a subject I think probably Osborne was reintroduced to working in North County Dublin with Nathaniel Hone, his friend, and this kind of, maybe as a kind of mentor. Hone is, I guess, most famous for his kind of studies of clouds, the changing light effects on the Irish landscape, particularly coastal scenes. He was a keen sailor. There's an awful lot of coastlines of sea and sky. But he also painted landscapes and often included cows. There's these wonderful kind of very loose, sketchy cow studies by Hone. And so I think this is kind of quite evocative of the relationship between the 2 artists. And I was looking for a Hone I had another Hone in here, just as a kind of comparison to Walter Osborne's work, and then Aoife Marie showed me this work in your collection today, so she very kindly added that to the slide projection this afternoon, so a nice fitting kind of comparison. But the largest work in the Charles Edward Osborne bequest, so all the others are quite small studies. This is a kind of larger finished work, which is also in the exhibition, of a wonderful study of the play of light and shadow in an interior space from around 1883, and it is St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin. And Julian Campbell suggests it was painted on one of his return visits to Dublin in the 1880s before he returned kind of permanently to the city. So it predates many of his other studies of the environs of St. Patrick's and Christchurch cathedrals. It depicts 2 choir boys in front of the stairs to the tower on the left, and the monument dedicated to Archbishop Thomas Jones by Edward Tingham on the right in shadow. I recently went back to St. Patrick's Cathedral. I just wanted to kind of understand. So the light, I think, so this is in the kind of one of the transepts. There's a clear story as well, and there's a window at the end of the transept. So I think the light is maybe coming in from it was a cloudy day when I was there, so it wasn't great. But I just wanted to kind of understand where he was painting, where Osborne was standing. Unfortunately now he would have been, if he was painting there today, he would have been standing in the gift shop. So it wasn't such a useful exercise. And I did I was in touch to see if the archivists at the cathedral had any record of Osborne painting there. Of course he could have just gone in, sketched freely. It's a church he could have entered. They didn't have any kind of correspondence or notes on him being present, but they did say that the choir boys still wear the same surplices. And this is St. Patrick's Cathedral in 1905, so just after Osborne's death. And throughout the 1890s, it's an area that Osborne continued to paint, so he revisits it, and he paints not so much the cathedral itself, but the streets around it. It was in walking distance of his studio on St. Stephen's Green. It's about I'd say a 10-minute walk, so very much kind of within his environment, as was St. Stephen's Green itself, where he also painted the park. And adjoining, that's right, that's why I put this picture in. So this is the cathedral itself. You can see a little bit of a building on the left-hand side there. That's Marsh's Library, which was founded by Narcissus Marsh in the early 18th century as the first public library in Ireland. It's still operating today, although by the time Osborne paints, Dublin's first free municipal libraries had been opened in Capel Street and Thomas Street in 1884. It's a brilliant place to visit if you're in Dublin. I recommend you can visit the library and see where Osborne painted. So we have two works depicting the interior of the library, and again I went back recently. There's these wonderful kind of long galleries, I think, which is kind of a U-shaped building. So you enter in through this wonderful kind of long gallery with the bookcases perpendicular to the windows, and you go through those doors into this little room here, which was the reading room, and you see these kind of men seated at the table, and the man with the wonderful kind of whiskers features in both paintings. Thought to be suggested it's a library porter. I was talking to the librarians there, and unfortunately there's no kind of photographic or other visual references of records of the staff, so we couldn't identify him. The room has changed little. The table is still there, the chairs are still there, the wonderful green tablecloth has gone, and this room is actually the only room. There's a small fireplace just to the left of the table where the men are seated, and this was the only fireplace in the library, so this is why the readers kind of would huddle around that table. The one bookcase which had 19th century books in Osborne's painting has since been removed. They wanted to kind of keep the rest of the bookcases house one particular French librarian's collection, so they wanted to keep that intact. So that has moved, and the bust that you see in Osborne's painting is now around the corner in a window. They have a series of busts of writers. And then, this painting was donated to us I don't have the date, somewhat later, by a woman called Mrs. Twigg from London, and she bequeathed 13 works to the gallery, mostly works on paper, quite an eclectic group of including a drawing by herself, many of them not particularly notable. The small group of works on paper, and then this wonderful Walter Osborne painting, and a statue of a thoroughbred horse by Edgar Degas. So a fairly kind of eclectic and wonderful donation, and the horse was actually packed, this is an aside, the horse was packed in hay, and there was a foot and mouth epidemic in Dublin, so the Degas horse was quarantined on Dublin's docks until they made sure that there was no foot and mouth in the hay. Anyway. And then, of course, as you see in the exhibition, and the point is really well made in the catalogue, this relates, I think, so well to At the Breakfast Table in the Rackham Murphy collection. I should have had a slide, but you know the painting, with the group of figures around seated around the table, and the source of light coming from behind, and this idea of painting against the light with the light source behind the figure is also explored in this work, the second painting that Aileen Bodkin gave to us also in Marsh's library. And while I was in the library, the librarians took me down to a room and they had a book waiting for me. And so those paintings of the library are dated 1898, aren't they? Yeah. There was no record as with many institutions, the records are kind of patchy depending on who the librarian was at the time. Some were fastidious record keepers, others less so. And there was nothing from 1898, but there were several records of Walter Osborne visiting the library in 1900 as a reader. So you see, I think, about the 10th name down there, September 24th, 1900, Walter Osborne. And then the very bottom, I thought it was a nice kind of connection, the very bottom signature is Stephen Gwynn, who was a dear friend of Walter Osborne, who wrote a kind of wonderful biographical account, which is so valuable to us, and also the subject of this really exquisite painting, which is in the National Gallery of Ireland. So a lovely little find. It kind of brings these relationships to life. And this part of Dublin was about to undergo kind of really significant change. And this is kind of, I guess I wanted to talk about this sort of dear to me. I still only live about 10 minutes away, but for about 12 years I lived about in the upper left-hand corner of this map. So it's an area I know well. And this is, I had to splice two maps together here, so this is why it's 1886 and 1892. But this is the area around St. Patrick's. You see the cathedral there kind of in the middle. And then that road leading straight up through the middle of the slide is leading up to Christchurch Cathedral, the other Church of Ireland cathedral in the city. One was outside the city walls, one was inside the city walls, that's why there's two. And in behind there, in the streets and the lanes leading off, was this real kind of rabbit warren of tiny houses or narrow houses, and a huge amount of kind of industrial activity, craftspeople, artisans, all sorts of people working in the city. These, I guess, under some eyes were kind of seen as slums, and improvement works would happen in the 1890s and 1900s, funded by the Guinness family. And I was talking earlier, I don't know if anyone's been watching The House of Guinness. I gave up, I have to say. This is all part of that story. Benjamin Lee Guinness, the father, I think, had actually funded a lot of the restoration of St. Patrick's Cathedral itself and of Marsh's Library. And then his son, Edward Cecil I, Lord Ivy, in 1890 founds the Ivy Trust, and a huge amount of new housing, a new market were built. The lands directly north of the cathedral became St. Patrick's Park, so that was all cleared, the kind of markets area. And then you can see the difference in the kind of the road layout. There's all these little wee laneways, and now it's a kind of much more kind of a grid with large housing complexes, an after-school club, there's a swimming pool, and other kind of social facilities. So it underwent massive change shortly after Osborne painted these scenes. And I guess, and there you see the St. Patrick's Park, the area to the north of the cathedral, with the new housing on the right, and some of the older 19th century houses directly ahead were still there. They've all gone too, as you'll see. And so Patrick Street, as I said, is this kind of street that leads straight up through the middle of the slide, north of the cathedral itself. And just to return to the fish market, so this is one of those works from the Patrick Street area in the exhibition. And it was relatively widely exhibited and reproduced indeed in the decade following its creation. When it was shown at the Royal Academy in London and the Walker Art Gallery in 1894, the painting was actually titled Life in the Streets Musicians. As you see here, I love these these were illustrations of works shown in the Royal Academy annual exhibitions, but of course as reproduced as line drawings, so you lose a lot of the kind of painterly aspect, I think, of them, but still a great record to have. And here it's called Life in the Streets Musicians, which I guess could be interpreted as drawing attention to the figures in the background, what is possibly a street musician, an organ grinder, with the children gathered around, although it could be, it's a little bit ambiguous to my eye, it could be interpreted as an ice vendor. But in the 1903 Memorial Exhibition, it was listed as the Fish Market, and in 1908, when the gallery opened, the catalogue listed as the Fish Market, and that name in one form or another has endured to this day. So that kind of brings attention more to the women in the foreground of the scene, the woman selling fish and the child with her empty bowl. Very poignant. Both the 1908 Municipal Gallery catalogue and the catalogue to the Ballymaclinton exhibition that I mentioned with the women in their red cloaks, both of those refer to the fact that the old fish market was now demolished for Lord Ivy's improvements. As I said, Edward Guinness, the first Earl of Ivy, had funded redevelopment of part of Dublin's Liberties, as it's known, around the turn of the century, creating a new market hall just off Patrick Street and clearing land for the new park. I think drawing attention to Lord Ivy's philanthropic work in these exhibition catalogues both flattered Lord Ivy, who was a major patron of the Municipal Gallery of Modern Art, but also presented Ireland as a modernising nation to international audiences in London. An alternative take on that was, I found just recently, just before I came away, from a man called Thomas Kelly. And Thomas Kelly was an alderman, he was a city councillor, but a member of the Sinn Féin party, so a nationalist seeking independence. And I would have thought perhaps that he would have been kind of supportive of new housing, public housing developments. But in fact, he was more interested in the economic life of the city in a series of articles he wrote in 1910, 1911. Just a wonderful kind of street by street or kind of catalogue almost of the city and its economic life. And this is 1910. And he actually said, what has become of the people who lived there and the industries which were carried on in the neighbourhood up to a few years ago? I am unable to answer, and I know of no one who could. The principal business in Patrick Street was its market, held on the street, and we were all familiar with the crowds on Saturdays and Mondays, especially around the various dealers who, with acuteness and good humour, dilated on the value they were offering for public sale at such small prices. He goes on, it was true, of course, that their foreparents had for generations stood all these severities, and that they did not seem to affect their offspring, as the dealers, or what is left of them, are a very healthy tribe. But we are living in the age of philanthropic progress, and it would never let the poor dealers remain under the weather. So I think maybe Thomas Kelly, I thought this was quite a kind of evocative of the street life, the economic life in the street that Walter Osborne was also documenting. Osborne's painting of the Patrick Street area express, I think, as many of his scenes of Dublin, a degree of empathy, but they're not propaganda, they're not campaigning pictures. He would have been aware, I think, that this area was under change. He would have been aware of the imminent kind of redevelopment plans of the Guinnesses. And whether or not it was a conscious decision to capture these streets before they were gone or before they were significantly altered, he has produced a lasting record of a city at a time when art in Ireland were in a period of significant change. And Lane and Osborne, I think, both, obviously Osborne, well, they both died young, but their kind of contributions, even though both cut short, well, I wouldn't be here today talking to you and sharing these wonderful gifts from Osborne and Lane with an international audience. So I hope that was interesting. Thanks very much.
So thank you so much, Logan. That was really interesting. I'm curious, I mean, I feel like with those cow pictures, there were lots of connections to sort of Barbizon aesthetics in my mind. But then the urban scenes, I'm curious how Dutch genre painting influenced Osborne's method here. Like these market scenes seem sort of evocative of things I've seen from the sort of Dutch Golden Age, and a little later. But yeah, so that's where I'll end this question.
Yeah, and other 19th century. I mean, it's not unique. I think of Boudin's market scenes, and there's a kind of slightly picturesque quality to. I mean, and then the tradition of the. I mean, it's urban, but the peasant. I think it's the urban peasant or something. The urban poor as opposed to the rural poor. So it's part of a broader tradition. I mean, he's painting his. The streets around him, he's painting his kind of environment, but it also ties into a broader kind of art historical tradition. And I do think there's a degree of empathy, but then he is the outsider looking on, and he's creating paintings for sale that are part of this kind of broader tradition. So I wouldn't, in terms of it's not a kind of altruistic exercise, I think.
95.
Oh, yeah.
So we do know that he was interested in 17th century art, and you can see some of those references to Velázquez. He also went to the Netherlands after that trip. So he was there. And he certainly was trained in Antwerp, so not very far away. So it was in the air, so he probably had some connections with that.
It's striking that in this scene, in those Dutch genre paintings, the fish would be the point of vocalization, but here, right, if you're talking about the sort of potentially altruistic approach, right, it's more about the market life and the context rather than the commodity, which is interesting.
And it's interesting when he went to Paris. He talked about he spent hours in the Louvre looking at historical works. He wasn't particularly interested in what was, even though you see the influence maybe in some of his, of what was happening in contemporary art, but he was drawn to the masters. I don't know. I forgot. I had other slides of other works from. So and Life in the Streets. That was the original title that was given to it in the when it was first exhibited, and that echoes with some of the. He used that kind of format for a number of works. This work in Tate. It's hard to see, but that's actually looking up towards Christchurch, the opposite direction, and then this work, which is of course in the exhibition as well. And this is some kind of documentary photography from the time. And actually, the woman here. The fish seller looks very like the woman that he sketched, whether it was that particular stall. And I was actually it's quite dramatic, I think, this kind of perspective that he creates with the kind of tower of the spire of this cathedral kind of looming over you, which, and you get it here too, but actually I was trying to kind of stand in the traffic and recreate it, but the road has since been widened in recent years, and that kind of cavern-like, kind of dark, kind of aspect to it has got, even though the buildings are maybe taller now with the kind of apartment blocks on either side, but there's 4 lanes of traffic and trees down it, so it's it's dramatically altered.
First of all, I'll say I love the juxtaposition of the contemporary photographs with the paintings. That's wonderful. Thank you for doing that.
I thought I wasn't sure. I put them in, I thought, I was walking around, I was really excited by this. And then I put them in, I thought, these look terrible. And I said to Eva Marie, I said, I just want to check that I put a painting at the end, because I thought, I can't finish on that, kind of, it's like, and then I forgot about it, so.
My question is also about the fish market. I was thinking about how you were speaking about how it's like the Guinness family who's refurbishing this area. And in the gallery, this painting is pretty close in terms of proximity to like the high society portraits of the Guinness family. So it's a really interesting dialogue to think about their impacts on the city that Osborne's then recording, and he's also kind of painting them as well. I guess this leads to my question of who was the primary patron or audience for these urban life scenes? Was it also families like the Guinness family who are kind of actively intervening and kind of, I guess, ameliorating the situation of the urban poor, or?
Well, it's interesting actually, because I talked about the price. So this had been for sale at the Walker, but I think it was 1894. I said that Lane got a good deal on buying the 3 paintings because he bought the 3 for less than what this painting had been for sale at in the 1890s, but it didn't sell as well. So, and I don't know about the provenance of the National Gallery, the work from the National Gallery of Ireland. But yeah, I don't think the same people who were commissioning his portraits were necessarily buying these. And there's, was it Bodkin talked about, and others too in the time, turned to portraiture because people wouldn't buy the landscapes.
Right.
And that actually, I guess the kind of economic status of artists in Ireland at the time was part of what Lane was on about as well, about actually why he was commissioning the John Butler Yeats and William Orpen to try and lead by example, to encourage people to commission works. But there weren't very many opportunities to show them. There wasn't a big market, I think, within the city. I mean, and Osborne saying Russell saying that Osborne was the only portrait painter that could be, supported. Nathaniel Hone, for example, was a landscape painter, prolific scenes of the coast, but he had inherited an estate, so he didn't have the need. Sarah Purser had a kind of affluent upbringing, but then her father's business failed, so she turned to portraiture to sustain herself. She then invested in Guinness shares and made a fortune.
Right.
So that's another way, I guess the Guinness is, maybe not planned, but she made a fortune from investing in the stock market. She was successful as a portrait painter, but actually, and then she would talk later on about, it was her family. Her family had been brewers generations, and they taught Guinnesses how to brew porter, but so it's her funding actually that then, and her economic independence that enabled a lot of this to happen, that she could organise. She paid for that exhibition in 1901, paid for the catalogue, built a stained glass studio for other artists to work in 1903. So yeah, sorry, I'm rambling now, but the kind of economic basis of artists that operating Dublin at the time, I think, is filtering through all of this.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating that you can kind of trace like the different dimensions of this world, like in the gallery space, like through Walter Osborne, we can see how it's like interconnected.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
great.
it was a fairly small city, and all even to map it, like it was mostly this kind of south side, Stephen's Green. You know, like it's a fairly kind of close sphere.
Thank you. Any other questions?
How common was it for women to be involved in the art world, and how unusual or typical was it for Sarah Purser to be doing the things that she was doing that helped establish this whole network?
I think it's uncommon, but it's actually not in the history of our gallery, and actually in the history of modern art in Ireland. Women do feature prominently, although, I mean, it wasn't until, as I said, 1919 that women could become academicians. The arts club that Osborne was honorary secretary of, and Purser also joined, lady members were excluded from being on committees. So even though someone like Purser was probably, the most useful person to have on a committee, and they loved committees. They loved a committee. Everything was organised by committees. But yeah, women were excluded from a lot of roles in those kind of organisations. She was the second woman to be on the board of governors of the National Gallery. They were, I would say. And then Lady Gregory, who I mentioned, was very influential. And Annie Horniman had founded funded the Irish Literary Theatre. So there were a number of other women active. And then Sarah Cecilia Harrison. In terms of our gallery, Sarah Cecilia Harrison was another painter who wrote the first catalogue to the collection. And then as you go on, Mamie Jellett, Evie Hone, Nora McGuinness, in the founding of the Exhibition of Living Art later in the century, it's a lot of women drove it. I think mostly I say mostly Protestant women, like a lot of because they had more economic means at the time. And that maybe, I don't know, maybe gets written out of the post-independence sort of narrative a little bit, both gender and religion kind of intersecting to some degree. I think that's changed now. But yeah, someone asked us at a talk I gave on Sarah Purser, and someone said, oh, they were single and they were Protestant because they had economic access to and could sustain this. But it's not, yeah. But she was she didn't take no for an answer, I think. And there's a great, actually George Russell again gave a great account of her, just that she would, when you argued with her, there'd just be this kind of, like you were being under assault, this rapid fire kind of battery of argument and intellect, and everything just fell before her, so, yeah. Thank you.